And Padma is currently a legal associate at the chambers of Shri Singh. Just one second, I don't think the stream started. Mohit, could you just recheck? The stream didn't start. Okay, no worries, Mohit. Got it, yeah. I'll just restart, yeah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Abhishek Jain, and I'm pleased to invite you all to today's session on internships in the initial years of law school, the what, the when, and the how by Planty. Towards the end of this session, we will also be having a Q&A session for which we would request you all to put your questions in the live chat box. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us Prashasti Bhat and Padma Venkataraman. Prashasti and Padma both graduated from National Law University, Delhi in 2020. Prashasti is currently working as an associate at Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, and Padma is currently working as a legal associate at the chambers of Shri Singh. In today's session, Prashasti and Padma will be speaking about internships in law school, how to apply for them, when to apply for them, and also how to choose from the different kinds of internships that are out there. I would now like to hand it over to Prashasti and Padma to begin this session.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session. We thought we could start off with a very general, basic question that many people have as to, how you would go about choosing an internship, especially in your first 3 years of law school. I think generally what we've seen, and Prashasti and I have discussed this before, we've seen that students especially, seem to assess which internship to choose based on a few factors. One is, of course, access, that is, who you know, and because largely sometimes internships happen through contacts, so that's one important one. But two is also optics. So sometimes you want to choose an internship that seems more cool or visible, because sometimes some aspects of law are more glamorous than others. So you may want to work with a big name, even in the first year. And three is your general area of interest. So, for example, if you see yourself getting into corporate law, or you have a particular idea of what kind of law you want to get into, you will probably gravitate towards that kind of an option. Generally, though, in hindsight, especially now having been through 5 years of law school, I can safely say that I think it's a good thing for, especially in the first 3 years, to try what you want to try, because I think the pressure is the least in the first 3 years. So no one is really looking at what internships you choose. Even your CV, in terms of the weight, the internships that you do in the first 3 years, the weight is less, and it determines your future career less. So I think it's a great option to try what you want to try and do things that other people may not think are the best options in law school, or they may not seem like they lead to the safest legal career options, but they may just be interesting. So I think we will come to more about what options are there that may not look as straightforward. But I think that's the general approach that I would like to encourage law students to take, that to try what you want to try regardless of what anyone says, because fourth and fifth year you will want to get a little more serious about your internships, but the first 3 years I think you can stand to have a little more fun. Prashasti, would you like to say anything? Prashasti, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
Yeah. So I was just saying that I totally agree with Padma on this, especially because a lot of us, when we enter law school, we have a preconceived notion as to what we do in the first year, the second year, and the third year. And then that moves on, if you have, say, a corporate job in your mind, especially then, there's a lot of pressure to build a CV in a particular way because you think your employer, your prospective employer is looking for certain things. But honestly, the first 2 years, unless you the aim should be to put yourself out there and step out of your comfort zone, try what you like, try what is easily available in your hometowns, and it doesn't have to necessarily be in a city like Delhi, or you don't have to do it just because everyone else is doing, because there's a lot of value in just visiting the trial courts or local courts, which is more accessible, as opposed to say doing a Supreme Court AOR level internship in your first year. So there are a lot of options, and we'll get to that in some time. But just a general disclaimer as to how, at least both Padma and I are on the same boat when you say that you need to explore things and maybe, curate your CV as you go along. And the first 2-3 years are the best time to do that. So I'll just move on to like a bit more specific questions that we generally hear.
Sorry, can I just add one quick thing? Sorry. I just think that the reason why Prashasti and I are emphasizing so much on trying different things is that a lot of our lives, no one really tells us to try different things in order to figure out what we like and dislike. We have generally, whether it's our families or friends or, seniors, everyone seems to project this idea that they have a, certain direction that they want to move in. But most of us are pretty confused till pretty late in life. So I think that by trying different options, what happens in the process is character development. Even if you think that your CV isn't looking so great at that moment, by the end of, say, the third or fourth year, you'll have a better idea of who you are as a person, what you like, what kind of work environment you like, what kind of, whether you're more socially inclined or you're more legally inclined. So what kind of the substance of the law that you want to work with, I think, or whether you even like law in the first place.
Yeah.
There's fundamental questions. To be able to answer that, it's important to have different experiences.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So something that I get a lot, especially because of the kind of job that I do, is that what are the various check boxes that are useful to have in like a professional CV or in your profile in general, and if there are general ones that you just useful across different professional career options and higher education post law school. So the thing is that there is no magic formula for having like this perfect CV that'll get you to places. But the way you work around that is that you try a bunch of different things, and then wherever you apply, you can make it seem like you're inclined towards that particular field. So the reason why it's important to have like a different bunch of experience is because especially in like your fourth and fifth years, when you have to face an interview before even getting an internship, it's important to convince them at that stage that you have some idea of what you want to do. So for that, in the initial years, if you can show that you tried a bunch of different things, it kind of helps because it shows that you're not just moving straight without like looking into other options, and then you have really thought about what you want to do. So especially from a corporate law, law firm perspective, one thing that you need to keep in mind is that if you have a placement cell in your law school, you probably have your placements in the fourth year and key internships in the third year. So essentially, you have the first 2 years to kind of explore options and see if you want to go ahead with a corporate career. So my approach to this was that I wasn't sure. So what I ended up doing was that I did try out a bunch of stuff. I also ended up doing corporate internships so that if I wanted to apply for a job, I would have like a safe bet to rely on. Like you try out whatever you like, but at the same time, you also are, playing it a little safe by also having internships at the right places. The things that your seniors say and stuff like that. So that's like a general tip, because although we are asking you to try out a whole different set of internships in the first 2 years, also be mindful of the fact that in the third year or in the second year also, you might have to like do 1 or 2 internships so that you keep all your options open. That's always helpful because you do get to experience different work environment. At the same time, in case you want to end up applying to a law firm kind of internship, you have that option available as well. At the same time, I've also seen people who are very hell bent on a corporate job and start applying for law firm internships on their first year. So again, it's a matter of perspective, but honestly, I think that you don't need to push yourself to that extent, and you have the first 2 years open, and maybe Padma can touch a little more about what kind of internships you can do in the first 2 years as well.
I think actually it might be useful to hear about all your internship experiences. So to sort of give a flavor to the audience as to like where we're coming from. So maybe you can go first.
So in the first year, a lot of people advise me that you don't have to like intern, which is fair. You don't. But I think that as a student, you're so used to like the student life that you haven't really stepped out. At least I hadn't in say class 11 and 12 intern. Like the concept of internship was very new, and I am happy that I took those in the first year to kind of explore internships at places that were not even like something that maybe a law student will have to do. So my first internship was with the Hindu. I interned there for a month, I think in December and some parts of Jan, and it wasn't legal work. I did end up working with the legal department as well because I wanted to try that out, but it wasn't legal work, and the kind of work that I got exposure to was quite amazing. Um, Editing, book reviews, and all of that. So that also, in effect, ends up contributing to, say, your research skills or writing skills. Even the fact that you have a commitment between 9 to 5, and you need to go, how you speak to people in your workplace, and just grooms you as a professional. My second, and also the reason why you start interning early, that there's obviously a benefit for that, is because, as Padma mentioned, a lot of times in the first year at least, it's a little more difficult to get an internship because you're way too young. And if you have some kind of a reference from your older previous employer, it just makes the process a little more easier because when you apply for an internship, you ideally also have a cover letter, like in your cover email. You also mention where you interned before, you can use them as a reference. So if you start interning in the first year, that kind of acts as a confidence boost, as well as the fact that you can use those contacts. Say I interned at the Hindu, and there was a really famous Madras High Court based advocate who used to write columns to the Hindu, and I asked my boss to refer me to her. So I got my second internship with her. So, you would never think that something like this would pan out when you actually apply for the internship, but it really doesn't. And in law school, you would also learn the fine art of networking, and these are just like, you know, um, things that just work out. So these were my first two internships.
Right,
And
and you're not from Delhi, right? I mean, our
no,
college was based in Delhi, but
yeah,
neither of us are from Delhi.
yeah.
And I think we're both first gen lawyers. Like, there's no. Is there a lawyer in your family? Don't think.
No.
No, right? Yeah. So it was a very new world for both of us.
Exactly. And it's also very intimidating in the first year because you do have your set of people who come from uh, a family, they come from a family of lawyers and they already know people in the field. So in the first year, if you don't want to intern, it's fine. But if you do, I think it's an amazing opportunity to do an internship at places where you might not consider later in a later point in time, because as Padma said, you might have to get a little more serious in the fourth and fifth year. But say a non-governmental organization, a media entity, newspapers, all of these places, they're always looking for people to help them out. And it's a great place to like put yourself out there, see how you are as a professional, and just pick on skills, because you never really know how these will pan out, and hopefully that'll lead to something more concrete in the future. So that was my first internship in the first year, and in the second year, I tried to intern with litigation offices like advocates, and my dad was staying in Chennai at that moment, so I was interning at a lawyer who was based in the Madras High Court. Padma, do you want to add something as to what you did in the first 2 years?
So actually, in my first year, I was one of those people who didn't intern
Yeah.
because I was really confused about law. Like I wasn't even sure I enjoyed. I mean, I wasn't even sure I was interested in law at all, and I couldn't figure out whether I was interested in any alternatives. I was just basically very confused, and I think the first semester, especially in any law college, is pretty intimidating. You're normally surrounded by people who are very sure they want to be there. At least they project that. So you start questioning as to, okay, am I the only loafer here types? um, but so it took me like a year to sort of figure out that I even wanted to intern, and I felt like I didn't know anything in the first year, so I just didn't end up interning or even thinking of an internship. I think in the summer vacation after my first year, I decided to. So I'm from Bangalore, and there's this research slash think tank called Center for Internet and Society, which is based out of Bangalore. And I had known a couple of people who had interned there previously from my college and from some other colleges. And I'd heard it's a very chill work environment. They give good work to law students. But they're not primarily a legal research think tank, which is why they work a lot with internet freedom, digital privacy, data rights, etc. So it's a good mix of tech work and legal research related. But they're pretty welcoming with law students because they put you on their internet governance team, and that's a whole different conversation. But I think what I took away from that internship, and I did that internship for like 3 months. So I have done a couple of like long internships because I felt like in 1 month, I was not able to get a proper flavor of how things worked in that work environment. Like I felt like I was just adjusting in the first month, and only from the second and third month, I really picked up skills, which is why I felt like I preferred, long term internships. So 1 month would be during our break. I would be able to go physically full time in that 1 month, and then I would work remotely from college in the second or third month. So what I took away from that kind of an internship was when you start out with, say, a more research based internship, especially in, like Prashasti said, an NGO or a think tank or something like that is not purely legal work. What happens is I think you have more freedom to sort of explore your skills in a low pressure environment. And I think that's something that no one really tells us, is that how high pressure proper law internships can be. So for example, if you start out with a litigation office, you may not realize it, but if you talk to any litigation or like corporate law professional, they will tell you that their work environment, the pressure levels are very high, and therefore they trickle down even to the interns. So there may be less patience for you messing up or making mistakes. They may not have as much time to mentor you. You may not have as much of a social experience because the work hours are long. So things like that, I feel you have a better time in maybe an NGO or a research think tank, where they're more accepting of interns from like different backgrounds. And even if you're not as sort of quick with the law, you have that time to sort of get comfortable. And I think learning how to research and read stuff that is not purely law, it's easier when you're not as familiar with the law. So in the first year, I think when you come in, you don't know much about law, but you have read, say, like Prashasti was talking about the Hindu. I'm sure she would have found it easier to relate to the information and the kind of articles that she was reading, because we read newspapers even when we're in school. We read current affairs, we have GK, things like that. So the kind of information, the way you process it, the language in which it is written, it's easier to process. So I think NGOs and research places it's a good stepping stone to more serious academic work. And I think that's why I found it easier to sort of adjust in that environment. And once you pick up some certain research skills or analytical skills, drafting skills in that kind of an environment, it's easier to transpose that into a purely legal environment.
And
That's how I felt.
there's just one more point that I wanted to add. So, especially if you feel like you know what you want to do, which in the first year, it's a little more difficult to have everything figured out. I think if you put yourself out there, especially say a law firm or say a very busy litigator, like you're interning with a very busy litigator, um, and it's too hard to process because you're in the first year. Um, it might have a negative impact as well. So I totally understand where Padma's coming from, especially the Hindu or like any other place that we had our first internship experiences with. It was quite low pressure, and it was the timings were fixed. The expectation was also not the same as say if you intern with a law firm, but um, it's something you need to consider because I think a lot of us rush into things, especially in a law school. You feel very pressurized to do that. So our advice would be to like not do that, not fall into that trap. So I just wanted to like highlight that because I don't want that to have a negative consequence, like
Yeah,
especially for the young minds.
I agree. And the thing is, there are actually so many options in terms of places that you can intern because, especially in the not-for-profit sector, they're understaffed, so they generally are more accepting of interns. They're more responsive also. Like many of these, more visible places that you may apply to, they may not respond to your emails, right? They may not give you an internship that easily, especially if you don't have a contact within the organization. But many of these not-for-profit places or like magazines and stuff like that, you may have a better shot at being mentored well because they have more time. But also I think if you are interested in sort of cultivating your perspective of the world, sometimes it's better to work at a more ground level. So for example, I as a personality, I know that coming into college also I was a little more socially oriented, as in I care, like I'm deeply invested in certain causes. So I knew I wasn't sure about law, but I was sure about this. So I was like, okay, let's just explore how I can sort of combine legal work with more socially oriented work, which is why I opted for NGOs and research think tanks to start with. Because I said, okay, I mean, that version of law is at least palatable for me right now. Even if I don't know if I want to go into law fully, I can start with this. So that's why my first year was there. After that, in my second year, I think I interned with an environmental and waste management advocacy NGO based in Delhi, where they work with waste workers and sort of securing their rights under the applicable laws, and they generally do waste management advocacy and stuff. So that also had a huge impact on me in terms of seeing how an NGO works, and in terms of also understanding the challenges that they face also in getting laws implemented. In college I feel like sometimes we're taught a lot of information, but sometimes they just for whatever reason we're not shown how broken the system is. So I think that comes with maturity, because I guess maybe they don't want law students to be that jaded about life. But I think through your internships you get that practical experience, which is why I think it's a good combination, like Prashasti said earlier, to put yourself in slightly uncomfortable situations. Like it should be the right balance. We're not saying like jump into something that you want to run away from, or something that scars you because it's so difficult and intimidating. But I think we think it's generally good practice to do something slightly different from what you may be expected to do, or what you're comfortable with, or what you've done before. So that way you get to meet new people, you may get to learn about something. Maybe you think you're not so socially oriented, but you work with an NGO and you figure out that you actually care about some cause. Or you think like you care only about social causes, but you work with, say, an IP litigation firm in like some third or fourth year, and you figure out that you're really interested in that kind of law. So without trying, you won't know, which is why we're saying try different things in the first 3 years. And then after my NGO internship, I again did another. I interned with Vidhi, which is a legal policy and research think tank based in Delhi. I did that for a month, and then after that, only in my fourth year did I do my first litigation internship. And that was a trial court internship with my current boss, actually. So that was my first internship, and I was the last person. I mean, in my mind, I was the last person who would try litigation, because everyone around me was just really, very sure about either litigation or corporate law. And I was still like, roaming around in all the non-law internships. Um, but I decided that I should try it. And I'm not that I was not that comfortable with Hindi because I was from Bangalore. On top of that, as a woman, sometimes you're more reluctant to step into heavy court experience because it's very male dominated. On top of that, if you don't have any contacts because you're not from a lawyer family, and generally I was not interested in law, so I didn't know how to sort of go about it. But luckily I landed this internship, and it was a full-on criminal law trial court experience. And that was something I never imagined myself doing because it was totally outside my comfort zone. If anyone has any idea about how litigation works, especially in the trial courts, you have to be very comfortable with the local language. You have to be able to talk to people from very different backgrounds. You have to really assert yourself. And as a person, I was very soft and like generally non-confrontational, but that does not work in litigation in general across India. You need to sort of put yourself out there and sort of push your way to the front to sort of get your work done. So I chose this internship to cultivate these new skills because I know I had gotten comfortable with like a research desk job kind of internship. And I think that that is also something that has influenced my choices a lot. Sort of figuring out that it's basically skills training. We're cultivating different sets of skills versus just, I interned here, I interned here, I interned here. Like that may be what your CV shows, but what actually helps in character development and giving you a perspective on what you like and dislike is the process in which you by which you cultivate these different skills. So in certain internships, they may be more research heavy, more maybe you're writing blogs and stuff, so more drafting heavy. So you may get more deep into the law or into a particular issue. But maybe in a litigation office, because it's a very short turnover period in terms of time, which is allotted to each research question because it's so fast paced, so you won't be doing that same kind of in-depth research about anything. So it's a very different kind of skill you're cultivating. It's to be constantly alert and on your feet, and very that response time should be very fast. In policy places or research NGOs, it's a little more laid back, so you have more time, it's less pressure. So I think that you cultivate different skills depending on the kind of internship work environment you are in, which is why I think it's important to do slightly different ones, because you can repeat the same thing, but that I'm sure you will anyway do once you uh, decide to focus. But yeah, the first 3 years, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and if you still don't want to rule out, say, a corporate job, you can still do that. Like in the third year, especially, a lot of law firms are welcoming, students about third year. So you can do that, um, and you know, do that so that you are not ruling out on that option. Because in the first 3 years, if you keep exploring different things and then you have your placements in the fourth year, it becomes a little more difficult for you to justify as to why you're sitting for placement. So keep that in mind as well when you chart out your future course. So just that.
Oh, I think I had to sort of
Yeah.
take off from where you left in terms of how a CV, how it looks best, right? I mean, I think based on what I've told you about my experience, I went to very different workplaces. So it's not like my CV was streamlined in terms of, accumulating experience that is relevant to that workplace. So I think, and this is just all of this depends on the approach you pick to approach life in general. And that same thing that you will apply to college, you will apply to your internships as well, and you will apply to your personal life. So in general, I feel like it's important for me, and I figured this out a little early. I figured out that it's a priority for me to try different things. And that I realized that every person is very, they're a unique individual. So no one's CV is going to look the same. And that is your USP. You shouldn't, I think that pressure is on law students from very early on to be, they'll see that one senior who they really relate to, and they'll be like, oh, I want to be like that person. Or they'll see this one mentor and they'll be like, oh, I must do exactly the same things they did to get where they are. I think that is a little premature, because life is really unpredictable and nothing is permanent. So, what you think today, 3 years down the line, your opinion is presumably going to be very different. Which is why I think that CV you can't predict how it'll look like in 5 years. So even if you're really determined for a corporate law job or like a litigation, or you don't want like law, it's just that your CV can have pretty diverse things on it. It's really about how you see your experiences and how you package them with confidence to a prospective employer,
Exactly.
or even to the person you're applying for your next internship with. So I could have done totally random stuff like 3 consecutive internships that have no relation to each other. They may not be in the most visible of places. I may not have gotten an amazing recommendation letter from them. But if I'm able to understand and communicate what exactly I learned in each internship and how that is a valuable skill or a valuable like personal experience that has helped me grow as a person, I think that is what really makes or breaks a CV. So it's not the document in itself, it's your story. And I think that's not told to us enough, because, it's almost like we assess each other based on the CV. But I think that that's really important to emphasize, that you can have a wonderful story that is very interesting to listen to as an employer, even if your CV looks bland according to you. So it's really about how you see your life and how your internships have either excited you or how you've learned from them. That is why I would say be picky about your internships, not because they will add to a really illustrious CV that will sell well with a top corporate law firm or a top litigation place, but because you will have a really good story to tell, and that will be very interesting to people you never even expected to work with. And sometimes life takes you in very different directions, which is why, just to have no regrets, just try everything. I think 1 second. We can move on to the next, right? How much? Yeah. So one thing that we get asked a lot, I mean, and we also asked our seniors a lot, is this obsession with if you don't have XYZ extracurriculars on your CV, what happens to your CV, or how many extracurriculars do you have to do in order to qualify for an amazing job, or for an LLM, or for a master's. So, and I think Prashasti and I have had pretty different experiences in law school because of our different interests. So when I entered law school, for example, I was pretty little scared of talking in public, so I didn't really gravitate towards mooting and debating the way many of my batchmates did. And I always found it a little intimidating because I thought it was more male dominated, and people were very assertive. Like I said, I was pretty non-confrontational, so somehow I just didn't have the courage to try them. And I happened to do the internal mooting selections only for the first time in my 4th year, and by which time my interests had also changed, so I wasn't willing to give so much patience to these extracurriculars. I also did not write many papers during college. So, in that sense, those traditional extracurriculars that, most law students try out, I somehow just missed them a bit because I was focused on my internships, and they gave me a lot of like I learned a lot from those and didn't feel like I was missing out on these, because I preferred, thinking and researching and writing and expressing myself that way. Whereas many people also prefer, speaking and arguing, and that's fun for them. So I don't think I found that as fun, because I like conversational kind of expression. I prefer that, and I'm more comfortable like that. So, which is why I didn't do many moods or ADRs. So I, because of the kind of places I apply to, so I don't think in NGOs and research think tanks or litigation places for that matter, I don't think they really these extracurriculars have much bearing on them. I think that they generally look at how confident you are, and generally how clear you are about where you want to go. It doesn't matter whether you've done the traditional extracurricular activities. I think Prashasti can give a better idea about corporate law firms.
Um, so, when I entered law school, I really wanted to try out mooting because I think that's one of the activities that you kind of associate with law school. Um, Having that research proposition that you work upon, and then you actually get to argue it yourself in front of, say, a mock tribunal and things like that. So I did get involved in mooting quite a bit in my law school. And through that, um, I did participate in the internal selections, and I was lucky enough to get allocated a really good international moot and a good team, which took me to places. So I did get internship opportunities out of it. So I would say it works the other way around as well. So you do these kind of activities. Um, it gives you this kind of a platform where you interact with a lot of working professionals because they're the ones who come to judge moods and say ADRs. So you can get internship opportunities out of that as well, and I think it's important if you're comfortable to try that out. But in terms of internship application, I think in the first initial 2-3 years, most organizations are very forgiving if you don't have that set things that you think people in law school should do, because they also know that you're applying to learn. Like, wherever you go, whichever organization you join for an internship, they understand that you're just into law school, and they're not expecting a set, template of a CV. So, in terms of skills, obviously these extracurricular activities are important, but is it a must? It's not. And honestly, if you're involved in, say, a student organization, or if you're involved in legal aid, these are the kind of things that we overlook in law school, but they teach you a lot because there's a lot of responsibility. You deal with like real world situations as opposed to some proposition that you work on for 6 months. So this also shows a lot of initiative on your part, right? So I think, Padma, you're part of the student welfare committee, right? And
Yes.
so whatever student organization I was part of, I did get asked a couple of things on that, like, in while you intern, or when you sit for interviews for your internship, you do get asked questions as to, can you tell us an instance where you've demonstrated leadership? And that can come from any extracurricular activity. You don't have to pigeonhole it to, say, mooting, ADR, things that you associate with law school or law students. So with respect to job applications, at least, it does help, but it's not the only thing that you can do. It's again about the packaging. Higher education after law school. So the thing is that, especially with mooting, you get exposed to a very niche area of law, or an area of law that maybe isn't part of your curriculum in college, right? So I think that if you do end up mooting, um, the kind of exposure you get to a particular field will help you determine, like, like your internships, if that's something that you want to do. So it's really good that you try it out in law school, but especially for higher studies, it does count. But I feel that in India, especially, we give a lot of weightage to one or two particular activities, including mooting. And it's not the same when, say, you apply for your higher studies, because they care a little more about your social initiatives, what you've done um, in law school for social cause, and if you have been part of, say, a student organization that has led to significant differences in in college. So this is something that I learned only a bit later on, because especially in my third year, though, I think the only thing apart from attending classes that I did was mooting, like preparing for my moods and stuff like that. And I do feel, and this is my personal opinion, that we end up giving a lot of like importance to just mooting or debating in law school, and there are like much more extracurricular activities that you can explore, and you don't have to feel obliged to just try it out because everyone else is doing it. But having said that, it does like give you a lot of opportunities in terms of like internships, or say exploring a particular field of law. And I would say that if it is something that you're genuinely interested in, do it, but don't get pressurized into trying it out because there are other stuff you can do in law school as well.
Yeah, I think that it's true when she said that like you don't have to try it, but I think that just as I said about, just as we spoke about how it's important to try different internships, I think it's also good to give everything a shot. I mean, of course, if you like very actively dislike something, don't do it. But if you're okay with trying new things, I think it's a good idea to put yourself out there a bit. An important thing that uncomfortable experiences also what they teach you is uh, how you can improve, or like when they shed more light on your areas of discomfort, and then you realize that okay, if I'm resistant to that activity, it's because I'm uncomfortable doing X. And then you realize that okay, but X is a valuable skill that I can cultivate, so that it doesn't have that kind of control over me, and therefore I have more freedom in sort of choosing what I want to do later. So for example, if like me you were at least a very non-confrontational shy person, and you are avoiding mooting for that reason, that may be precisely the reason why you should try it at least once.
Yeah.
At least the internal selections where it's little less pressure, but you get a flavor of like a sense of how it is to speak in public, to speak on the spot, to respond to questions, etc. So that's just it may help boost your confidence. It may also sort of show you what kind of environments you're more comfortable in. But having said that, I would like to say that there is this perception in law school that I felt like all 5 years, is that if you don't moot, or if you don't do ADR or something like that, you cannot become a good litigator, or
Yeah.
you cannot be a good lawyer. I think that is just very wrong, and it's a misconception, and I don't think we're told that enough. Um, I think that there's a certain uh, element of performance that is involved in mooting and ADR, which comes more naturally to some people. And that same kind of performance, I think, is not really needed in real life lawyering. In the sense that if you to be a good litigator, to be to flourish in a law firm, or to be a proper legal professional, you need to know your matter really well. You need to know your files really well, and that just means a very good preparation and confidence with your knowledge. And if you have ever had the opportunity to hear how lawyers argue in court, you will see that it doesn't sound as rehearsed as a moot. So you don't have to be as fluent, and your sentences as perfectly structured. In fact, in many courts in India, especially at the district court level, it's not even fully English, right? You have the regional language being spoken as well. So that increases the sense of comfort, and you can actually argue in the language and with the vocabulary you're comfortable with. So the idea, when you become a legal professional, it's just about communicating your argument. And believe me, more people are really good at communicating what they think and their arguments than they believe themselves. Um, so don't assess whether you're good. Don't assess your worth as a legal professional 5 years hence when you finish law school based on your success in mooting. Definitely try and continue to moot or do these extracurricular activities if they interest you and you have fun and you feel like you're learning something. But if none of those boxes are ticked for you and you don't want to do it, don't let that take a sort of a hit at your confidence in terms of how you will succeed later.
Okay. Um, so I actually wanted to touch upon this because I think that a lot of the first, second, third years might be watching this, or they might end up watching this a little later. Padma, do you want to talk about like the kind of internships they could be doing, like in the first 2 3 years? I mean, we've spoken about our experiences, like in general, what we did in our first 2 years, but do you think we should be touching upon that right now?
I think that just based on my personal experience, it's also shaped my sort of what I would recommend. I think that generally, the more intense the legal work is, I think you can put it off till at least second or third year. I think your understanding of the law is also very like superficial. I mean, frankly, all 5 years, you really start to understand the law only once you start working. But first 2 years, definitely you're at a disadvantage, and that can be very difficult. It can be difficult to churn out good quality work and actually understand what you're working with and be of use to your. See, I think that something people don't really talk about very often is the nature of internships, right? Most are unpaid. They're also, how do you put it? Mm, they're looking for free labor in a way. They're not looking to mentor you. So what they expect from you is also a certain level of performance, because they're looking for you to fill up for their, for their own colleagues or employees, instead of sort of providing a simulated learning environment for you to learn as just a trainee or an intern. So you're also stepping into a real life work environment which is looking for real contributions. So the expectations are also higher, which is why I think it's good to sort of balance that with the right kind of work environment where uh, hopefully you know ahead that it's not only slightly low pressure, but also it's a positive work environment. I think a lot of us just happen to unluckily step into negative workspaces, and then especially sometimes interns are treated very badly. And I think that it's important to sort of little do your some sort of research before that to figure out whether it's a good work environment. So I think that in the first 2 years especially, when your confidence, you've just started building it, one, I think it's important to not choose a very high pressure environment. Two, just try and choose a positive workspace, because you don't want to get traumatized and really scared. You don't want it to you don't want your confidence to take a hit when you're just starting out, because that'll affect how you apply for places after that. And given that law school is already really competitive in general, it's good to sort of work towards environments that boost your confidence, or at least don't, at least you're on the same level and not underconfident. And I think that if you come from an environment, sorry, if you come from like a school where you, generally all of us in school, we do some different things. We're not just like doing law or doing only one thing. You may be dancing or singing or playing sports and studying. So I think that sort of, it's tempered down in law school because you have so much work. So sometimes it's nice to try some different things that are not core law area interest for the first 2 years, to sort of as a segue to sort of move on from that, so you feel like your life, there's more diversity in your life. So I think it's a good confidence boosting exercise to do that in your first 2 years. And then when you feel more confident and you're more comfortable with the law, I think it's better to go for slightly more hardcore legal internships. So I think your corp law, like litigation, or even like a hardcore legal research place, I think you can start from like third year types, and people will also take you more seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, this kind of reminds me, back in our first year, I remember a lot of people when getting internships, like right after the first semester. Because you're way too young and without contacts, it's a little difficult to get your first internship, especially in your first year. So I just wanted to like throw a couple of ideas in case that helps, like practically speaking. Um, if you like a certain area of law, or that you kind of like how a professor teaches a certain area of law and you think you want to explore that, I think one thing that a lot of people overlook is the fact that you can also ask your professors if they would like some research assistance. Now, this is not the typical kind of an internship that you think of, but this is something that you can engage in doing. You apart from building this personal kind of a rapport with that professor, you also um, get an insight as to how much an academician has to work to build a curriculum for people like us back in law school, as well as get proper exposure to research, or how especially a lot of professors are also engaged in a lot of what is it called, like like this side research, uh,
Grants?
research, yeah, sorry.
Grants? Like, I mean,
Yeah, like
yeah.
the apart from the centers, they also have a lot of research work going on, not just like academics, teaching and work. They have a lot of research work going on. So if you can like ask one of your professors, you can also think of that as your first stepping stone for an internship. The second thing that I wanted to put across out there is that a lot of people don't intern with, say, a government organization. It is a lot of government organizations do have like a specific application process, and they do prefer people, see, after the third year. But it's if you do get an opportunity to say intern with NHRC or something of that sort in your first, second year, which you might not want to do in your third, fourth year, is that you get to understand how a government body works, that particular government body works, and also I think it's an amazing opportunity to intern with a regulator, say SEBI, because when you're actually into the profession, you will most likely be facing like these regulators, say cases in which these regulators are involved. So if you have like some kind of an insight as to how these bodies work, that also is like a very valuable thing to have. So say in the first or second year, these are again low pressure environments, and also you can think of like interning with these government bodies,
Yeah.
because they do take in a lot of law students as well.
Yeah. I would just want to add to that. I think that's a very good point. So regardless, I mean, I'm sure given how like politically charged the world is right now, I'm sure many of you might have like an opinion on something or the other, and you may lean more towards, the government, or maybe more critical of it. But regardless, I think it's important to know how all stakeholders in society work. Then you get a better perspective and on the nuances of, the machinery in society, governmental machinery. And if you're critical of the government, then that helps you understand the government better. And if you support, like if you want to work in the government space, then that's good for you. So whether it's like in a litigation environment, whether you get, you intern with like a prosecutor, with a public prosecutor, you get a sense of how differently the state approaches, say, criminal law cases, or particular kinds, or with the CBI or whatever it is. Similarly, like she said, if you do an internship with SEBI or another regulator, it'll also help you if you take up a corp law internship later. And the same works for, say it's like NHRC, or some other kind of governmental associated agency, and you end up working at, one of these research think tanks that, do more socially oriented work. They often reflect a lot and write a lot on what the government is doing. So your understanding of how the internal workings of any government agency can also sort of be transposed to across government agencies, because they work very similarly. So that's also very useful, and I think you're right, and people don't talk about it enough.
Yeah.
Often, in fact, students sometimes are very critical of the government, and therefore they don't want to, work in those kind of spaces, because they may be seen as more slow paced, or more bureaucratic.
Yeah,
But
cool.
yeah, so but really, when you really start working, you realize how less you know of how the other stakeholders work, and that extra knowledge is always useful, regardless of which side you are on. So yeah.
Yeah, and one more thing that I didn't eventually end up interning at that place, but another really good place to intern is all these mediation centers that a lot of high courts have come up with. Like they have set up mediation centers, right? So um, I know for a fact that they do take law students who say are from the first or second year, because you eventually you end up sitting and observing the mediation proceedings and how things are outside the court regime. So that's also like an interesting option that you can consider. And in your first year, at least, if you're not getting an internship, don't fret about it. You can also consider doing, say, a summer or a winter course, which can kind of broaden your horizon. Say, if you're not interested in law and you want to do something else, you can also try doing that and use that opportunity. Like that kind of time you don't get later on. So if you have like 2 months break after the first semester, why not go ahead with doing that? And then you can also consider things like signing up for a language course and stuff, because all of it at the end of the day will help you build your character and just like show how you are interested in different things, and you're not just a bunch, like, a set of 5 liners about your um, internship experience in your CV, because ultimately your prospective employer will be talking about you as a person and not just picking up lines from your internship experiences. So these are things apart from your internship that you can consider in case you don't land an internship in the first year, which we all understand is very difficult to do right after your first semester.
Yeah. I think that it's generally very important to try different things, and like you said, even non-law stuff, because then you really figure out, hopefully by the end of the fifth year, you're somewhat more clear on what you really want to do. It may not be that I'm clear on like what I want to do by the time I'm 40. I mean, still at the age of 40, but at least I'll have some idea of where I want to start now, regardless of whether I stay there. And I think that, of course, there are like many considerations that come into the picture, whether it's like, finances or like family or contacts. There are some many considerations that complicate your life by the time you come to fourth and fifth year. But it's still a good idea to have. It's still good to have an idea of what you want to do. At least you'll be able to see, like, okay, I want to do this, but there are XYZ considerations, and then you can decide whether or not to do that. But it's good to have that as your baseline so that you're not confused, because most of us are confused, but we have some general areas of interest, and interest is really cultivated. I mean, most people think you're just born with being interested in something, or you enter law school being super interested and passionate about something, but most of us are pretty like meh about most things. When we enter, you're really confused. So just know that interest is really cultivated, so don't like flip out in the first year if you see other people being super charged about certain kinds of internships, and you're pretty ambivalent and just like walking through life. So you'll figure it out. And another thing I just wanted to add is, we've been talking a little about like the order in which you can do internships, but it's really up to you, and I don't think there's any fixed order. So for example, in my fourth year I did a litigation internship, in my fifth year I did another litigation internship, and I went back to a magazine internship where I interned with the Caravan. So and that was in my final semester in college, and I still hadn't decided what I wanted to do. So I think that it's really up to, you can be confused forever in life. You can also be confused to the end of the semester, end of your 5 years. So I think it's a very individual journey that you sort of, you go through. But I think that for me, it was important to try different things, and that extended till my fifth year. Some people get more clarity earlier and they want to, sort of narrow down and focus. So it will really depend on like the approach you cultivate towards your internship. So there's no one fixed route. That's all.
So just to add on to that, like when you talk about the order of internships and stuff, obviously, like you can have a sort of approach in which you take entirety of 5 years to figure things out, and if you feel that you cannot afford that kind of a luxury, and you might have, say, you have some family pressures, or just because your placements happen much before, say, your fifth year, you can play it safe. And like these are some general tips that I got from my seniors, and I thought I'll pass on to you guys. Is that in your second year you can start trying to apply to smaller tier 2, tier 3 law firms, because they do end up taking law students from the second year. And then in your third year, if you have a placement cell, well and good, you can, it makes the process so much more easier. If you don't, you can start applying for law firm internships as well, just to like keep options open. Because what happens is that in your fourth year, the time when you have your placements in law school, it becomes very, very difficult to justify as to why you want a job when you have no exposure to that, right? So also look at how things pan out in law school, like in general how the things are, as to what comes one after another in law school. And the reason why people are so hell-bent on like charting out all of the internships, say, in the first year, is because of this, like precisely this. Because say after your day zero for your batch, you will not have another day zero. So if you want to keep that option open, well and good, do that from your second year. But at the same time, there you will find people who would be interning, like who would be doing two internships after their semester in different law firms. All I'm trying to say is that you don't have to do that either. Like, you don't need, say, a 4-5 corporate internship to land a corporate job. Like, they also value the fact that you explore stuff and then you want this, right? But at the same time, you might want to you might want to play it safe and show that you have enough exposure in, say, working in a law firm. You like the kind of transactional work that they're doing, or um, that you generally like the law firm that you want to be sitting in for T0. So also take that consideration into account. And there are a lot of people, at least that I came across in law school, who would rule out a law firm just because of the terrible things that they heard from people around. It's also very important to have your own opinion, like build your own opinion, because it's very individual. I honestly did not think that I will join a law firm, but I am like in a law firm right now. So, and I don't regret it, because it does like groom you to the kind of person that you wouldn't have expected. And it also like teaches you a lot of skill set, working in a high pressure environment, multitasking, and all of that. So don't rule it out just because you've heard terrible things. There are terrible bosses everywhere. So just just wanted to make clear that it's good to be a little cautious as well. At the same time, don't chart out things for yourself. At least at this stage, in your first or second year.
Yeah, she's right. Like, if if by your second or third year you're reasonably sure that you want a corporate law job, then the window for sort of experimenting closes significantly. It Because your placements happen in fourth year, so you have to sort of build your CV by then. But if you don't want a corporate law job, or you want to try litigation or NGOs or whatever, normally your last semester in law school is when you'll get a job, or maybe even after that. So you have technically all 10 semesters to try something. And those places are also not that particular about, that you have like, you have to do 80% of that kind of internship only. So
Yeah.
you can sort of wing it a little more with with those kinds of options. So it is true that if you're more keen on a corporate law job, then you'll have to tailor your CV a little earlier. But yeah. Mm,
I think we've covered like most of the points. Like,
yeah.
overlap a bit. Um,
Do you have any general tips for students? I feel like we've just been giving general tips.
yeah, right.
um, mm,
I don't know, Abhishek, do you have like questions that you want to ask her? I can't really think anything from the top of my head.
yeah, maybe some prompts would help.
Yeah.
Okay, so honestly, I don't have any questions. I had to cross all of them off because I think you've covered the details of every single thing, and it was great that you both also shared your individual experiences. I think I do agree that you've been giving like general tips, but I think just as a parting remark, as somebody who's just entering law school or is currently in their first year, so something very specific to first year students, how do you think is a good way to just try to assess what is the right place to try at the right time, right? Because another question that you often get is that, okay, so even if I look at it as 10 semesters, or let's say I say that the first 3 semesters are my trial period, I have, let's say, 6 or 7 tries that I get. So how do I prioritize what are those 6 and 7 things that fill those 6 and 7 spots that I have?
Good question. I don't think I thought so much when I was choosing my first internship. All of this thought is mostly like in hindsight, analyzing my experience. But now I would say that I think mentorship is rare. So, especially in your first year, try and go for an organization that is perhaps smaller. Because if you, for example, want to intern in like a fancy company, or that has many people, they may just miss you, or you may be one of many interns, and therefore that one-on-one mentoring just may not happen. So I've heard many lovely stories about like internships where people have interned with really small litigators in their local hometown, in the district courts, or like Prashasti was saying at the Hindu, where you'll probably have like a staff editor who's sort of you're assigned to them. So I think that the size of the organization also matters. So I would say stay away from optics for the first year, as in don't try and simply go for a visible internship just because it has a big name. To be very honest, employers also don't take the first 2 3 years of internships, they don't take them seriously. So just think of it as something you're doing purely for yourself, to start building certain skills and to get comfortable in new environments. So I think that you should like keep repeating that to yourself, so that that pressure of choosing a fancy internship sort of reduces. And then I think most of us have certain interests, so I think that's a good starting point. If you have, if you're totally confused, so maybe you're more interested in some social kind of cause like women's rights or gender related stuff, or maybe economic policy, like anything, and maybe you can look for an NGO or like a governmental agency that works with that kind of, in that kind of area, and then you can see how to apply to them. uh, with regard to how to write to them, I think it's generally, I mean, I've seen different styles of applying, but I think generally employers appreciate sincerity and honesty. So it would be a good idea to give in your cover letter or whatever, because we don't have much of a CV at that point. In your cover letter, I think it's good to give them a sense of who you are as a person, what you expect out of that internship, and what skill you're looking to build. I think it sort of communicates a certain level of clarity that is often missing from your peers. So it sort of signals to your employer that, okay, I know where I am today, and I know that I want to build XYZ skill, and I think that that is best built in, like, under your mentorship. So they also get a sense of like, oh, okay, I can teach you that. And it's also that you're coming with a certain purpose and not just blindly applying everywhere. So I think that's about it in terms of how to communicate your internship interest. Yeah.
And also, like in the first year, you also need to be a little mindful of the acceptance rate. You might not be hearing back from a
Yeah.
lot of people, so don't put a lot of pressure, and don't think that you want to apply at a particular, sorry, you want to intern at a particular place. So just earlier, Padma and I mentioned like a couple of things we did and a couple of things I thought were interesting. I saw other people do. So just start applying, say, 2.5 months before. If, say, you know that a place kind of gets filled in very quick, even 3 months is not a bad idea. Start applying. These are like a bunch of places that you can shortlist and just follow up and stuff. But at the same time, don't get fixated in one or two places, which is the reason why we're not like pointing out like a couple of things that you can do to build your CV. We don't. I don't agree with that approach, and I know Padma doesn't either. Because the thing is that unless you have a ready contact available, which I know that a lot of people don't have in the first year, we're not that privileged enough to have that. It is very difficult until the very last minute to know where you're interning. So just start applying. You'll figure it out. And I think in the first semester, especially in the first semester, I was very particular that I didn't want to do a litigation internship because I found the code a little intimidating, like the environment, and I knew that this is my 1 year that I can actually do things that I am not accountable for. I can do whatever I want. No one will actually, ask me why I did something because I just wanted to put myself out there and do things. Because after that, you'll also feel a little more pressure to try out a couple of like particular legal stuff, like legal things, like work with, say, a litigator and like a tier two law firm, because you will end up getting influenced by the choices that your peers make. So in the first year, just start applying. You will, if you don't get an internship, you can also consider doing other things. Like try to make use of that time. When you get your semester breaks, just try to make use of that time, and it doesn't necessarily have to be through an internship. And that internship can happen any place. So just think of a, think of say 4 5 good places and start applying. You might end up getting in one of those places, and that's well and good.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a few like things about internships that we don't talk about in general. One is rejection. I think around you in law school, you may be hearing many, people generally show off a lot about the internships they've landed and how many people they've written to and how, they have so many things to choose from. That can be quite intimidating, and I think that people show off for a reason. Like they won't mention the rejections they've received, but they will, project overconfidence. So no, I mean, see it for what it is. It's just people showing off. So it's really fine to get rejected. In fact, it's a very, very important learning experience to put yourself out there, knowing that there is a risk of like not getting accepted. um I would say sometimes it even may be nice, especially if it's a particularly rigorous interview process. When you get rejected, ask for feedback. Um, because sometimes they just give, blanket rejections, and you often don't know why you didn't qualify, especially if you put in a lot of effort in the interview process. So I think that way it's a very important learning experience. And the first few times will be very uncomfortable. You may feel sad, you may cry, and you may feel like you're not worthy of anything because everyone else around you seems to be having successful stories. But you start to develop a thick skin, and you realize it's just part of the process. And then you learn your second lesson, that it's okay to not, none of us are perfect, we're not going to succeed every time, but it's perseverance that matters, and in the long run that is what will pay off. And another very, very important thing that people don't tell us is, if you happen to enter a work environment, whether when you're interning or when you're actually working, but mostly while you're interning, if you happen to enter a work environment that is not a good space, in the sense that I've heard many stories where interns are not treated very well, like generally you're not paid, that's a separate issue. But if it's a particularly negative workspace where you feel like you're not being respected, please try and talk to someone like in your support system, whether it's family or friends or a senior, and please try and somehow exit that environment, because generally as an intern you may not have the power to sort of address that negativity in the workspace. So it may be completely out of your control, but your confidence shouldn't take a beating, and you shouldn't have to go through that just to have that internship written on your CV. No one is going to say, oh, 4 years ago you quit after 2 weeks, how could you do that, it reflects badly on your character. Literally no one is going to say that. And so please don't attach so much weight to the consequences of leaving an internship that you're not interested in or that you don't like. It's totally fine. 5 years of law school is meant precisely for that, to try and leave things, to try different things, but leave it if you're not interested. This doesn't mean just give up every time that something gets difficult, but assess for yourself whether it's healthy for you to stick around and whether you're actually learning something. If not, it's okay, leave.
Also, Abhishek mentioned something about having 6 or 7 tries. So I think that would be true if, say, you do one internship after your semester ends. But also know that these days a lot of places organize running internships as well. So like there are a lot of options out there. So if you want to try something out, especially I think Padma, you were interning with a magazine which like you went after college, right?
Yeah. So in my last semester, my classes got over a little earlier. So I would, after that, take the metro and go. That may be a problem for some colleges that are located more remotely.
That's true.
But I think because of the pandemic, they
There
may
are a
be
lot of
operating
things that are
virtually.
virtual now, so
Yeah.
it is actually a good thing because you get to try out more things, and it need not necessarily be those 6, 7
Yeah.
tries. So that's just something I wanted to highlight.
And I think I mean, for example, I didn't even do the 6, 7 tries. I think I did like 3 internships totally till my third or fourth year, but I did long term internships.
Yeah,
But that was
yeah,
a
that's what
conscious choice I had made. So I'm just saying, like, the form and manner of your internships is totally up to you.
right.
So don't, just because your friends are doing something, you don't need to do the same thing. You can just choose however you're comfortable and do it. But I would just say, just trust in the process a bit. I think all of us keep doubting our choices way too much. Just know that by the end of 5 years, you would have grown significantly as a person and your personality. Like the point of all these internships, I think both Prashasti and I feel is character development. The job and your professional career, it'll take off as it has to. That's just a byproduct of it. But I think the purpose is to figure out what you're interested in and to develop your character, because college itself and classes and the campus experience, it's a very small part of like growing up. You're between 18 and 24 or whatever the ages are. It's a small part of that, even though we're told by family or professors or whatever that is the most important thing. I think many of us feel like a lot of the important life related learning happens outside class. And sometimes through internships, you learn more about your interests, you meet new people, you make new friends, you figure out what kind of bosses you would prefer. There are so many things. Or even traveling to your internship place is sometimes fun. So, small
And the
things.
work environment. I mean, just figuring out what kind of a work environment you're comfortable with. If it's very hierarchical, like, are you okay with such a setup, or that's a really
Yeah.
putting kind of a point for you. So
Yeah.
it's also important to figure out during the internships. So it's not just about landing the job. I
Yeah.
think that's just like a very small part of it.
Yep. I think that definitely answers that question. I think with that, I do come to the end of this session. So I would just like to take this opportunity to thank both of you for taking the time out for this and joining in to share both your individual experiences and also to try and give some tips to students who are trying to make the same decisions in the future. Thanks again, Padma and Prashasti. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was fun.
Yeah.
Yep.